Recording is going. Nervous system PowerPoint. Okay, so T3's assessments will be available Friday through Sunday, 16th through 18th. We have fewer and fewer assignments, and we're finished on the 25th. So we're going to talk about the nervous system. So the nervous system allows rapid response. Everybody knows if you put your hand on the stove, you're going to respond very quickly to make sure you don't burn your hand. If you begin to fall, you immediately brace yourself and reach out to stop from falling and hurting yourself. The endocrine system releases hormones, and they have their effect over time, such as growth hormone, thyroid hormone, and so on. So the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so make sure you know that the peripheral nervous system is all nervous tissue outside the central nervous system. Afferent means that the information is sensed. For instance, pain, heat, pressure. And it looks like we got another person. Admit. Okay. So afferent means the information is carried from the exterior toward the central nervous system. Efferent means information is sent from the central nervous system to the outside or the periphery, or from the brain to the arm, or from the brain to the foot. Muscle contraction, glandular secretion is an efferent output. Input is the afferent division from the periphery or the exterior to the central nervous system. Okay, cancel. Nope, I don't want to do that. So here's a good diagram. The whole purpose of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system is to process information. Input comes from pressure, heat, pain, touch. All the receptors in your lungs, your heart, your gut, all that information is constantly sent in the afferent division. Sensory information, it's processed, and then whatever response is planned and is processed and ready to go. So that's muscle contraction, digestive action, cardiac action, glandular secretion, and whether adipose tissue is used, broken down to provide energy. So there are two types of nerve cells, neural cells, neurons, and neuroglia, which means nerve glue. These are very, very important. A lot of research has to be done on this. So there's nerves and there's nerve glue. These are cells that support the nerves. So classes of neurons. Sensory neurons pick up information from our gut, our bladder, the outside, pain, touch, pressure, temperature, stimulate muscles and glands. Interneurons, association neurons, they provide a link between the sensory and motor neurons. So what are the parts of a nerve? Cell body, dendrites, and axon. So if you look at a typical multipolar neuron, you have dendrites, which receive information from the axons, or the axon endings, from other nerves. You have a cell body, a nucleolus, you have mitochondria, and the axon hillock, we'll learn, is where the nerve impulse starts. So nerve impulses always travel away from the cell body, starting at the axon hillock and going down the axon to cause muscle to contract, for instance. So there'll be Weber sign images that you'll have to identify these parts of the neuron. So neuron and nerve cells is the same thing. So what are the classes of neurons? Unipolar, multipolar, bipolar. So what do they look like? So multipolar has a cell body with dendrites, a single axon, and the axon endings. Unipolar neurons are involved in the afferent or sensory system. Information is picked up from the exterior, again, such as touch, pressure, temperature. Then information is carried on a unipolar neuron back to the central nervous system to start the processing and to plan for output from the efferent system. So the efferent system, okay. Bipolar neurons are not very prevalent, but they do occur in the eye, for instance. What are the types of neuroglial cells? So we have star cells, astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, which means few branches, microglia, which means small glue, and appendable cells, which line the cavities of the brain where the cerebral spinal fluid is circulated in the brain. So if you look at an image, you have nerve axons. This is an oligodendrocyte. It helps wrap white matter around the nerves to make them more effective in transmitting messages. So the insulation allows for faster conduction times. Then you have microglial cells, astrocytes, which help support the nerves and interact with the blood vessels and the nerves. So the central canal, that's part of the part of the spinal cord. So again, we have neurons that have cell bodies and nuclei. They have axon helix, which carry information away from the cell body. The information is received from the dendrites from other axons. So the oligodendrocytes insulate the nerves and increase conduction speeds. Microglial cells are there for defense. Astrocyte maintain the blood-brain barrier and interact between the blood vessels and nerves. So neurons, astrocytes, microglial cells, appendable cells line the vesicles of the brain, and that's where cerebral spinal fluid is held. Okay, so in the central nervous system, we have satellite swan cells are found in the peripheral nervous system, satellite cells, and swan cells. So in the central nervous system, oligodendrocytes form a sheath to insulate the nerve fibers so that conduction speeds are enhanced. Satellite cells are in the peripheral nervous system. So both these cells, the satellite cells and the swan cells. So note the function. So swan cells is the fatty substance which wraps around nerves, and the whole purpose is that so the speed of conduction can be increased. Okay, neurons communicate, process information. So they receive information from the sensory system, and they process that information in the central nervous system, and that information goes out to muscles, glands, and so on. So neuroglial means nerve cells. Those are the cells that help provide food and information to the nerves, and they're involved in the blood-brain barrier in keeping infections out, and so on. Okay, so we have organization of central nervous system. So we have a collection of neurons that have a shared function. The nucleus is also a center with discrete anatomical boundary. We'll talk about particular ones coming up. The neural cortex is the gray matter. White matter is axons that are covered with myelin from the oligodendrocytes, and those nerve fibers are insulated in order to create faster conduction speeds in the nerves. Okay, so in the peripheral nervous system, groupings of neuron cell bodies, if anybody's ever had, what's the disease that, well, an infection of your ganglia in your periphery. I can't think of the disease, but a nerve has bundles of axon. So the spinal nerves, which transmits information to and from the spinal cord, and cranial nerves to and from the brain. So we have the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. Receptors are in the periphery. Information is carried on unipolar neurons back to the spinal cord, and if necessary, the information flows in tracks to go into the central nervous system. So gray matter is on the outside, then white matter. So we have the cortex, we have various centers. These nuclei are centers of cell bodies. White matter, insulated neurons that form tracks and bundles of axons, and several tracks that are in columns. Okay, so all the information that gets to the spinal cord first is carried to the central nervous system by these various tracks. Okay, so there are pathways that carry sensory information to the central nervous system, and ascending pathways which carry information away from the central nervous system to make muscles contract. Okay, how do nerves work? They have a separation of charge. Potential means voltage. So nerves pump different ions such as sodium and potassium, and they create differences in voltage inside the nerve and outside. And by opening various channels or pipes, they allow the voltage to change, and that's the electrical means of having voltage travel along a neuron. Okay, let's stop this. Let's go back to here. Let's stop the recording and save this. Stop recording. Stop recording.